And a very good morning to you if you've just tuned in. We're live in London this weekend. You're with Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson. Coming up on today's programme, my guests, Latika, Bourke and Simon Brooke, are joining me around the table to share their views on the week's biggest stories. Simon, welcome. What have you spotted?
Well, the New York Times reports on how Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are preparing for this week's presidential candidates debate. There are riots in Paris following Emmanuel Macron's appointment of Michel Barnier as Prime Minister. And watermelon pizza. Could it be the next big thing, I wonder?
We had bananas last week. It couldn't get much worse. Well, until I heard that. We'll also get the latest headlines from France.
Hello, this is Mary Fitzgerald, Monocle correspondent in Marseille. I'll be bringing you updates on the latest political developments in France, plus a couple of stories from the wider Mediterranean region.
Plus, the film critic Karen Krizanovich looks back at the Venice Film Festival, and Monocle's editorial director Tyler Brûlé will join me from Bangkok. It's the 8th of September 2024. Live from London, this is Monocle on Sunday.
Live from London, this is Monocle on Sunday with Emma Nelson.
And a very good morning to you from a damp London. I'm delighted to say that my panellists, Latika, Bourke and Simon Brooke, have made it in after, dare I say, none of us slept last night. We had a thunderstorm here in the United Kingdom, here in London, which lasted an hour and had a real sense of this isn't London anymore. We were somewhere hotter and more violent. And as a result, we've all come in and we're like chewed string. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do our best to keep going and keep pepped up and energised for the next 58 minutes. But my goodness, Simon, that was a cracker, wasn't it?
It really was. Like you say, it was a kind of tropical rainstorm. If you've always been brought up in the UK where we have sort of a bit of gentle rolling thunder or whatever, this was absolutely terrifying. And I think the worst thing, I was lying in bed thinking, what damage is this doing to the property or to things around me, and then thinking, did I leave my laptop out in the garden yesterday afternoon? Which luckily I didn't, but it doesn't help you sleep, I must say.
I just thought that the gods were angry, Latika. It was one of those.
It is the Australian in me. I love a good thunderstorm, and it's the one thing that I actually really miss about the weather in Australia. So the rare occasions you get a beautiful thunderstorm in London, I'm there for it.
Okay.
It's the best show you can have.
Like being home again.
Yeah, two
I mean, I noticed you went for damp. Why not fresh, clean, exhilarated? All the dirt washed away. There's so many other ways you could look at a thunderstorm.
It really is just damp. Let's head to Bangkok now. Our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, has freshly landed off an aeroplane. Good afternoon to you, Tyler.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, everyone needs to calm down. I'm in Bangkok. We had a thunderstorm about 5 minutes ago. Hugely violent, probably much more violent, and of course, Bangkok just moves on as normal. This is the tropics, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, you wondered why we mentioned the thunderstorm, Tyler. How's life?
Yeah, life is good. Actually, I have a fun fact on thunderstorms. I had one of those rare moments, it doesn't happen very often, but when I got on the flight out of Zurich to Bangkok last night, just before we took off, the captain comes around and says hello. And he said, oh, by the way, he said, do you want to come up and have a visit to the cockpit? And I thought, okay, well, this is before takeoff. I've seen, a few cockpits in my time. He said, no, because any time of the flight you want to come up and say hello, please do. So it was quite nice. We were flying over Iran. And I was up there for about 90 minutes just having a good old chat. And it was actually quite interesting. Sort of one side note, it's interesting, not all aircraft get to fly down this one corridor through Iran, but Swiss aircraft do because of their relations, their very good relationships, as Corda being sort of the one of the mediating forces, of course, diplomatically in Iran. So that was exciting. But we started talking about thunderstorms, and the captain and the first officer said this has really been the worst year ever, and I think one had been flying for about 20 years, the other one for 18 years, that they've ever seen for convective activity at 36,000 feet. So there's a fun fact for you.
And how much has it altered their ability to do their job peacefully? Because I imagine it must get quite lively up there.
It does, but he said, this is why you have to use radar properly. We talked a little bit about that Singapore Airlines incident from, of course, a few months ago as well, where that 777 also dropped a significant height. There were a few sort of, raised Swiss eyebrows about that. Because I said, was it really is this a climate change issue, et cetera, et cetera? And there was a little bit of a sense of, no, they probably just actually weren't using the radar properly, and maybe they were tucking into their noodles or something, and they kind of missed what was ahead of them. Anyway, that's the competition between Star Alliance partners. Anyway,
thank you very much indeed for that, Tyler. Tell us a little bit about sort of like the arrival process in Bangkok and how the place feels to you at the moment. I'm imagining that you've all turned up off the plane, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, incredibly well turned out, because your column this morning is basically a plea to everybody not to dress like a baby.
Yeah, well, that as well. Listen, I mean, passengers, I have to say, it's beyond hope. Though the crowd around me, they did make an effort. Crew was looking okay on the flight, but then of course you arrive in Thailand. It is the land of uniforms. It's also, of course, the land of new government as well. We have Prime Minister Shinawatra. This is Prime Minister Shinawatra number 3 now. Patongtarn, who has appointed, of course, her new cabinet, and much is sort of coming down the track. I just lunched with one of the country's more famous architects, and he said, "Listen, whether or not you're, of course, a fan of the Shinawats and the various regimes that they've had in this country," he said there is a moment of stability now. He said stock markets have improved. And he said, at least there's a sense of just moving forward. And it was an interesting conversation as well, just saying there's going to be, what he said, probably in the coming weeks, we're going to see a real push for Thailand to get back to where it was maybe, a decade ago, where it really wanted to push itself as the hub for creativity, for culture in Southeast Asia, the home. If you're looking for great architects, if you want to find fantastic graphic designers, you want to outsource projects to the region at a good cost, Bangkok, Chiang Mai, these should be the places you want to go. So tell us a little bit about the fact that you mentioned that we have a new Prime Minister, the daughter of the previous Prime Minister, one of the previous Prime Ministers, a comparatively young figure in her early 30s with zero political experience. That would cause chaos in any other country, yet there is this sense, is there, in Thailand, that when you have a constantly destabilized situation, that people actually get used to it and it becomes the norm. They do, but I would actually argue, and this is just, I was thinking about this a little bit earlier, she is from a political family. So she may not have any operational experience. This is not sticking up for the lady, but I think she's probably had, enough stick just for the fact that, okay, she's inexperienced. But if you've grown up in a household where your father was the prime minister of the country, where you've been to enough diplomatic dinners, where you've been around enough ministers being praised or chewed out, then I would say actually you do have political experience. You may not have had the regular chops of everybody else, but you've been living it for 30 plus years. So I would say that's actually probably better than a lot of people who come into office as sort of a pokey bureaucrat and have actually never been on the front lines and have actually never been to state dinners anywhere else in the world. Indeed, she's probably had quite a lot of private dinners and probably has quite a few interesting people on her phone in case she gets a bit stuck. That's the interesting. I was going to say that's the interesting thing in terms of actually being properly connected. I would say that she's probably well ahead of many of her fellow country men and women, but at the same time, you could say it could probably dance circles around many other people who might be sitting in posts in the EU or elsewhere. Let's move on to Paris, because the Paralympics close today, bringing to an end an absolutely glorious summer for the French capital. I'm just looking at the front page of Le Parisien, which is Tony Estanguet, Man of the Summer. In all the maelstrom and the turbulence that we're seeing in French politics, and we'll be talking to Mary Fitzgerald a little bit later on from Marseille, who'll bring us up to date on that, there has been this beautiful beacon of positivity and efficiency and just simple, plain old-fashioned joy coming out of Paris this summer, hasn't there? Absolutely. Of course, you've been a big part of it, Emma, experiencing it from your lovely perch high above the Seine, but also comes at an interesting time, as you said. The flame is extinguished after two extraordinary rounds of Olympic events. It comes at a time, of course, where we have the appointment of Monsieur Barnier, of course, as the prime minister, and we saw considerable protests yesterday around this. Let's see what happens. But nevertheless, again, good or bad, you like Barnier or not, left or right, there is someone in place now. I think there's also just a huge sigh of relief that, that really, France sort of, moves to the end of Q3, moves to Q4, moves towards 2025. At least there is now a prime minister in office. So there is something which resembles also stability and will help the country, of course, build on this, enormous halo which is around it. I was in Paris this week, of course, a lot of good feelings with the Paralympic Games. In full stride, but a lot of discussion, Emma, about what comes next, what happens for an encore, and that doesn't mean just looking forward, of course, to the Winter Olympics. This is the next round of Olympics after Milano Cortina, but of course, when France will be hosting the Games 6 years out from now. But I think at the same time, you've got the big Notre Dame ceremony coming up. And then I think a lot of other considerations. We've been in the midst of Design Week, and even Design Week this week in Paris, which is Maison et Objet, which is the big housewares, accessories part of this. There was a different energy this week. It's always been, I would say, more of a European affair rather than a global affair. Of course, people fly in from everywhere, but it just had a different snap about Paris this week for that. And of course, Fashion Weekend is on the horizon as well.
Where do you build from that when you have such an unmitigated success in the world? And, you're a city like Paris and you didn't need the publicity to start with, but you find yourself basking in an absolutely perfect glow. And what does a city do from that point to ensure that it capitalises it, not just, as you say, within the sort of like the traditional frames of the Olympic legacy, such as redevelopment and boosting certain areas, but in terms to make sure that footprint on the world stage is very firmly, staying there?
Yeah, I think this is going to be, a number of things. If I was certainly one of the film development offices, if I was, of course, the Ministry of Culture in France, which, as ministries go, is very well financed and is very well organized. And is excellent, of course, at mounting major events, not just within France, but also to do its job in lock sync with diplomatic missions as well. I would say that they would really be hopefully, looking for even a little bit more financing to make sure that you can keep things going. And that also means, how can it be a more attractive place to, of course, keep the film industry alive and ticking. And I have to say, Emma, if you are on you don't need a long-haul flight, but this is one I caught on the plane the other day. If you get a chance to see Pas de Vague, it is just an exceptional film. And just a good example of, it's one of those films that, would you have stumbled across it if you paid attention to film festivals, if you're really digging deep into Netflix? Yes, you would come across it. But a film that didn't really have that much attention. It is, starring François Civil. But I'd say that's actually what France needs to do. There is so much amazing cultural output that there probably needs to be, I think, some better marketing, whether it's French pop artists and whether it's film, whether it's television series as well, because we know, we're all a little bit lazy. We're all victims to the algorithm, and sometimes you have to dig deep. And in the case of finding Pas de Vague, this was actually just on an Air France flight to Toronto earlier in the week that I came across it. And now I'm trying to convert everybody to the film. Absolutely exceptional.
We shall watch it later. Thank you very much indeed, Tyler Brûlé in Bangkok. Dodge those thunderstorms. It's 9:14 here in London. Let's turn back to the panel. Latika, Bourke and Simon Brooke. How have your weeks been?
Very eventful. I returned from the GlobSec Security Conference in Prague last weekend. I thought it was a very, very well-run show this year. They moved it from Bratislava in Slovakia, mainly because the nature of the government there means they just had such trouble in the years before now inviting and luring very high-profile speakers and guests, and this year they absolutely turned it on in Prague, and I think that conference is going to be there to stay. I think a couple of really interesting observations, one being, Emma, there was so much less Trump frenzy going on. Every conference I've been to in Europe in the last 6 to 9, 10 months, dare say it even 12 months, has been like, what if Trump? What if Trump? What are we going to do? Hand-wringing, everyone going a bit berserk. This time people just seemed to have kind of either priced it in, maybe they're hoping that Kamala Harris will win, but there just was not this kind of stress and anxiety about the prospect of a Trump 2.0 that I've really detected at other conferences. It's really interesting.
And as a result, I mean, when you look at the way that, let's say, the European Union learned the hard way when Trump was in power, that Trump was entirely transactional and it didn't matter who you were and any kind of past loyalties, that was done. So Europe has had to sort of fend for itself. That said, the main subject on the GlobeSec agenda was clearly Russia. And Ukraine, and
absolutely. How
Europe navigates its internal struggles. I mean, you mentioned the fact that Bratislava, Slovakia, is no longer a happy host for a conference which talks about how you can stand up to Russia. How does the European Union, well, what were the Europeans saying about how they were going to navigate Trump were he to get into power in a couple of months?
I mean, it was really interesting because one of the better panels I went to was quite provocative, was with Viktor Orban's political director on it. And, you know, of course he provoked shock and, you know, when he talks about wanting to wrap up things in Ukraine very quickly. It's certainly clear that there is less unity, I think, going forward about just how to resolve this. And it does feel like everyone was just kind of waiting now to see what happens in November, because that will determine everything. And mind you, I'm not overly sure that everyone's confident that if it's more of the same after November, we're any clearer about where we end up.
Because of Kamala Harris? And in what way? What do you mean by that?
I mean, the Biden administration is not overly direct on what it sees as a victory plan for Ukraine or how to get out of this either. So I'm not massively sure that we're any clearer after the election. Should it be Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, until we know the lineup of that? Well, who's going to be her national security advisor? Who is going to be her Secretary of State? Those two decisions will be really, really important, because right now we know it's the Jake Sullivan model, and a lot of people at the conference, I've got to say, do not speak very well of Jake Sullivan these days.
OK, there's interesting talk in the Sunday Times today, Simon. Grant Shapps, the former Defence Secretary, I think he was former Secretary of most things in the Conservative government. I'd forgotten he'd been Defence Secretary. I always remember him to be associated with trains. Yet he's stepping up and saying, let Ukraine strike Russia with our Storm Shadow missiles. The former Defence Secretary says new Prime Minister Keir Starmer should authorise President Zelensky to fight Putin on his own territory. And this is, you know, it's all well and good when you're no longer in government to say that. But that's a moment, isn't it, when the United Kingdom could step up, where, and you know, as Latika has just mentioned, a potential, not necessarily vacuum, but maybe no longer a prioritising of Ukraine by the United States. Is this the moment when the UK could really sort of enter into the fray in a more significant way?
And the whole of Europe, really. I think this is one of the interesting, if you look at it from a sort of UK-EU perspective, obviously a lot of the debate has been about economics and trade and things, but now it's interesting that over the last few months, there's been a sort of question about whether the connection or reconnection, really, of the EU and the UK could be actually more about defence. The UK's extensive, not as good as it was, but it's still pretty extensive defence capability, certainly when it comes to girding people's loins and stiffening resolve against Russia. The UK is seen as very strong. So whether there could be some connection there, some way that the UK could contribute towards a more sort of coordinated EU approach towards Russia and Ukraine, especially if you think what's happening in Germany as well with the rise of the extreme left, the extreme right. One of the things they do have in common is, of course, they're very lukewarm. Well, more than not even lukewarm. They're actually quite antipathetic towards support for Ukraine. So there's a lot happening in that area, I think. And also, Latika, you were talking about the sort of, possible Harris approach, whatever, and the way people are viewing Trump as well. Talking to a pollster just this week who was saying actually some of these polls we're seeing which are giving Harris a small but useful lead could well be wrong, because a lot of them are carried out online, and a lot of the people who are very much online are people who are more sort of pro-Democrat. So actually it could be slightly skewed. So we could well be in that, as you say, that situation where we've got a Trump White House that is not going to continue this strong line against Russia.
It's interesting to see what the way that the two camps, Trump and Harris's, are playing it at the moment. We've seen an absolutely unspoiled campaign by Harris. Although from a personal point of view, I don't want to see her teeth anymore. There's just so much grinning. But we feel as if, I don't know about you, but I feel as if Trump is storing something up. Or
I think
Tuesday
is going to be such a decisive moment in this campaign.
Tuesday is the debate between, it's the first time that Harris and Trump will stand together in the same room and debate. And everybody is working out whether the bumps in the road are going to appear in Harris's campaign.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the outcome of the last time Donald Trump debated. The Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, had to quit. So we know that he has form. Sure, Joe Biden was a very weak opponent, obviously, naturally. But Kamala Harris, there are lots of questions about whether she will withstand the sort of pressure, whether she will withstand the sort of tactics from Trump that he's deployed against, say, Hillary Clinton in the past. I personally think that's going to be less of a problem for Kamala Harris. I think she's done very well to dodge all the identity politics attacks. I think she's done very well to shut down the insults when they come and say, this is about America, this is not about me. That's really, really clever. And I don't think Trump's going to land the insults as well. Where I do think he will have a good hot go and maybe make some room is on things like migration, on things like fracking. She's already had to change her position on that. Where will she stand on inflation and things like this? How much is the Biden legacy Kamala Harris's legacy? And if she wants to distance from Biden, why hasn't she done it now? And if she doesn't, well, then the problems that have enabled Trump's rise back to potentially power are also belonging to Kamala.
You've advised plenty politicians in your time, Simon, especially when it comes to high-profile arguments and debates and appearances. How would you be advising Kamala if you had her in a small room and could, just talk her through it according to, heading up to Tuesday? You have something like, Trump is he's like trying to nail jelly to a wall. You know it's going to be horribly hard to do, and you might not achieve it because he comes out with stuff from the clear blue sky. So the unpredictability of Trump is something which I think maybe you have to factor into it. But also, isn't there a really simple narrative here of you have prosecutor versus felon?
Yeah, and I think it was interesting that Kamala Harris, as soon as she was out of her campaign was launched, she went straight into that. I've prosecuted people like Donald Trump, and I think she'll obviously be a very good debater in the traditional sense. But as you say, it's difficult to debate with Donald Trump, who is so sort of illogical, really. He will not stick to policy. And in fact, both of them have been very policy-like, which I think is a good decision for both of them. That might be a bit controversial, but let's not get dragged into policy. I think the difficulty for Kamala Harris will be, as you say, Latika, to defend her record on immigration. That's going to be difficult. Mind you, she can also point out that he promised to build a wall and he never did it. So he talks but doesn't deliver. The other thing is that famous question that Ronald Reagan asked the audience when he debated with in 1980. And that is to ask, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And if the answer to the audience is, well, actually, we're not, then that's going to be very difficult. So it's the economy, stupid, as they say. So that's going to be a difficult one for him. I think for her, I think one of the best things she can do is to continue this line that she has been using about him being weird. And I think she can wind him up. It's interesting that I'm told that the Harris campaign is not going to do the racist, misogynist line that Hillary Clinton tried, because we know that. And there's no point in saying he's dishonest and he's a nasty man. We know that. And obviously his supporters actually rally round when they hear the Democrats attacking with that. But I think the thing to do is to make him look ridiculous. The big debate as well is, it sounds very small, is this hot mic issue about whether the microphone should be left on for the person who is not speaking, for the candidate who is not speaking. That was previously considered difficult because it meant that Trump could constantly attack Hillary Clinton. But in fact, according to the New York Times, the Harris team has been pushing for the microphones to be unmuted to allow Trump to be rude to their candidate again, and that they believe actually could work to her benefit.
Yeah, I think that's a smart decision because this is not 2016. I think if America is ready for a woman president, I think the time is around now. And you see the Democrats even behaving and responding very differently. I think one of the challenges, though, Simon, is this prosecutor line is great at a Democratic rally because they all can't stand Trump and they do think he's a felon. But for a lot of Trump supporters, they think that these criminal prosecutions are absolute political witch hunts. So this whole I'm a prosecutor, I know this type, I put him in jail, he belongs in jail, blah, blah, blah. I actually am very think that could be a bit of a counterproductive move for her to stress because in Magaland and in some of those wavering voter land, they think all these trials are excessive.
It's the deep state, isn't it? Actually
exactly.
Their man, yeah.
So does it actually matter?
Yeah, absolutely. It's pressure, whether she's across at policy. And let's be clear, there's more riding on this for Kamala Harris because, as you said in your opener, Emma, she's had a completely dream run till now. But let's also be very clear. She has subjected herself to one interview which she had to bring Tim Waltz along to. That was bizarre in itself. The interview wasn't exactly a difficult one. And she has not been hammered on any serious policy detail other than having to outline why she's changed her position on fracking. Trump is absolutely going to do that. And the other thing about the last debate, Trump actually did very well in that debate. It wasn't just about Biden being exceptionally terrible. Trump was far more across his brief than I've seen him before. He was far more laser-like in the lines he was trying to deliver. If he can bring that back, and Kamala Harris has some stumbles or falters or is seen to be not across her detail, I think that is definitely game-changer territory.
Where does humour and style sit in this? Because what we have seen, and we've seen the narrative of Trump being weird, but we've also seen the Obamas use humour beautifully, especially at the Democratic convention a couple of weeks ago, with a wonderful visual joke about Trump worried about the size of his crowds.
Only Barack Obama could deliver that line,
joke?
couldn't it?
Did we like that joke? I wasn't a fan. I was not a fan.
I found it refreshing. I found it really refreshing because there is that tendency where everybody gets buried down, excuse me, into the detail and the, are you going to win this point? Are you going to win that point? And you do find occasionally just that moment of levity can hit home in a way that actually, can any of us remember much else from anybody else's speech at the DNC apart from what Obama said? It's a funny one. How much confidence does Kamala Harris have to step up and to introduce a little bit of style? One wonders that when you are the unknown, not necessarily the underdog at all anymore, you have to step up and show that you have a relaxed confidence about you, which is what Trump dishes out in volumes.
I think normally I would say be very careful of humour. I always advise political candidates never think of a joke on the stump because that could be really difficult. Let's plan it. Let's workshop it. I know this sounds like the killer of a good joke.
This is awful, Simon, what you're telling me.
Let's focus group it. Does it work? But I think actually what we've seen, Kamala Harris can use this to her advantage because we know that publicly anyway, Donald Trump doesn't have much of a sense of humour.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And we've seen, haven't we, how this weird line, he's weird, and so is J.D. Vance. We've seen how this has really got under his skin. I mean, a wonderful example, the New York Times quoted him saying, weird, I'm not weird, don't call me weird, she's the weird one. I thought, yeah, all right, we've heard the word weird enough now.
Yeah.
You've really driven home that message.
And you believe it is true. There's that whole thing. Yesterday, the fact that the judge is going to defer sentencing until after the presidential election, one commentator was arguing, this is brilliant because he can now talk about it and he can now talk about the I think it's 36 or 37 convictions that he's got, and he will keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it to the point where it actually becomes, a part of his public identity. Just briefly, how do you workshop a joke, Simon?
Well, essentially, you've got to sort of try it out and just see what might be funny to you or me. But as you were saying, Latika, you didn't like Obama's joke,
I thought it was
you?
unnecessary.
Yeah, whereas on the other hand...
way?
Well, I don't like size of appendage jokes anyway. I think they're crude. I think they're crass. I think we can all do a bit better. The Obamas have spent years saying we go high when they go low, and here they are on stage cracking a DICK joke. To me, that's just crass. I didn't find it funny at all.
And yet, of course, Michelle Obama was absolutely brilliant. Her line about those black jobs I felt he actually said, didn't he, it's very difficult to follow Michelle Obama. And he's absolutely right. I mean, she's such a class
enough, I thought
act.
Oprah Winfrey gave the best speech at DNC. I watched them all
Really?
and I came away going, Oprah was the one for me.
Why? I didn't see the Oprah Winfrey one.
She was brilliant. I mean, it's Oprah, of course. But I think what she did very well was draw together all the threads without being so political. And so it was a very unifying, optimistic way. And it kind of reminded you of the fact that this sensation is what America is. You know, Oprah Winfrey is someone who just became a megastar because she's brilliant. And that is the American dream. And that's what she stands for. And she's there standing and telling other black women this is what you can do too. And that I thought was extremely powerful. I have a bit of trouble with the Obamas and the way that it looks a bit dynastic, the way they've engineered Kamala Harris into this job. And I think that's probably...
Is that true, though? 'Cause
I think there's a perception that it could look like this. And
they kept their distance. They were the last to endorse her. They really didn't. They really kept back until the last moment.
Publicly, yeah.
Oh.
But if you look at the reporting, there's a lot of the Obamas' hand in it. I think that's probably troubling because part of the reason Donald Trump was successful in round one was because of the legacy of Barack Obama. And that's not a political point. That's just a fact. It did give rise to Trump in many ways. So I'm not totally sure that the Obamas are as helpful to the Harris campaign as everybody thinks.
I think they've got to be careful. I think it's interesting, isn't it, that if you think back, Obama was very careful about not making race an issue, wasn't he? He knew that could be difficult. So he was very much understated when it came to race. And also Kamala Harris, the attack against her was she's a DEI appointment, so the Republicans went hard on that. So it'll be interesting. She's obviously sort of playing that down as well. We've seen, with her choice of running mate, the good old boy, the white guy from the Midwest, to obviously play down the West Coast DEI pick, that sort of thing. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they keep that in perspective and don't make race a big issue. Just one other thing I do think is going to come up in this debate on Tuesday and really important, I think, and that is abortion.
Yes,
and I think
absolutely.
she's definitely going to play that card hard. And I think they're beginning to realise, or that they've realised that the Democrats, that is, that this is a big issue for them. And I think she needs to put that front and centre because there will be a lot of women voters who she is drawing on who just say, wait a minute, hang on, what are we actually talking about here?
And he has been so vulnerable on this too.
Completely.
He's completely flipped, avoided saying anything where he can.
Yeah.
And I would add, finally, I think the second debate that could be really critical to this is J.D. Vance versus Tim Walz, because I think J.D. Vance is such a liability for Trump. He was chosen at a time when the whole mission for Trump was about what does MAGA look like? How do we transform America permanently in my image? When he was up against Biden and he was pretty much cruising to a certain victory. Now he's saddled with this guy whose claim to fame is mocking childless cat ladies. This terrible statement he gave last week, which there's many ways you can look at the reporting of it, but it is absolutely true that the words came out of his mouth. In terms of school shootings, he says, I'm very sorry that they are a fact of life. Well, no, they're not a fact of life. This is the absolute issue. They're not a fact of life in many countries, not a fact of life in this country. They're not a fact of life in my native Australia, which cracked down on gun control after a very major massacre. They're only a fact of life in one country because of laws that your side of politics supports. And I just think J.D. Vance has the ability to expose the ugliness of MAGA, whereas Trump can pull it off and he can go out and say these things that are completely intolerable and everybody can laugh or they can rally around it or they can find some sort of inspiration in it. When J.D. Vance says it, it just lands like a flaming heap of terrible
completely. We come back to the W word as well, don't we? One thing we know about J.D. Vance is he is a bit weird. I mean, he's got a fascinating backstory. I think he's quite an interesting character in many ways, but he is just a bit weird. And we can see how Trump can work a room. He's great with the good old boys, with the human interaction, which is so important in politics. But there's just something a little bit odd awkward,
It's
uncomfortable about
the weird and
Vance.
nasty.
Yeah.
Trump is weird and bombastic and sometimes funny and showy, and he's got this dangerous charisma, right?
He's brilliantly simple in his communication.
Absolutely.
His choice of language, for instance.
JD Vance looks like a professional politician pretending to be all of that, but actually it just comes across quite terribly. So I think the vice president debate could be really interesting because Waltz is an absolute potent campaigner.
Very much.
And he does bring all that energy and joy without the Kamala Harris possibility of that leaking into something looking a bit vacuous.
We have to be careful that he doesn't overshadow Harris.
I don't get that feeling with those two, do you? I feel like they're very much on a unity ticket here.
I think there's a real chemistry between them. I think we saw from day one, didn't we, that great chemistry. And I think, again, just looking, as you say, the vice president's debate, of course, the point about JD Vance and Waltz is that they have a lot in common, really, don't they? It's just they're both from the Midwest. They both came from humble backgrounds. But this is something we've seen Waltz say, actually, since then, our paths have diverged greatly. And it's a choice, which of this vision of the American dream of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps do you want? Do you want to be the JD Vance, or do you want to be the guy who coaches the local football team and, was an army vet?
Yeah.
Let's move from one country trying to sort out its political future in a rather messy fashion to another one. Let's head to France, where we can hear from our France correspondent, Mary Fitzgerald. A very good morning to Mary. You're in Marseille. How's Marseille looking?
Unfortunately, quite rainy this morning, so not really it doesn't feel like the last days of summer here. We've had storms over the last week, but political storms as well, which we shall discuss in terms of the latest developments.
Yes, let's get straight on. A moment ago, we were talking about the way that the next president, and the words I wrote down as we were having our conversation were statesman-like, unifying and optimistic. Is there any sense that the new Prime Minister, Michel Barnier, selected after an absolutely agonising process by President Emmanuel Macron, do you think he will be statesman-like, unifying and optimistic?
Well, so a couple of things. He's all over the Sunday papers in France today, which is unsurprising. And one of the main Sunday newspapers has a poll carried out by IFOP, which basically shows that the French are mostly satisfied with the appointment of Barnier. So he 52% now, of course, it's 52% that say they're satisfied with the appointment. He's seen as competent, open to dialogue and likable. It's interesting just in terms of explaining Barnier's kind of the place he occupies in the French imagination. He's 73 years old, so he's the oldest prime minister France has ever had. So we've gone from having the youngest prime minister ever in Gabriel Attal, his predecessor, to now the oldest. He's also from the French Alps. He has this kind of old school vibe about him. I mean, somebody was reminding me yesterday that actually he used to put up political posters for de Gaulle. So we're talking about that kind of vintage. And for a certain type of French person, that is, I think, and the poll today shows somehow reassuring. Then you have those who do not like Barnier because he's from the Republican Party, center-right. They don't like his politics, but also they refer to the fact that he was a candidate in the last presidential election, during which he surprised a lot of people who previously liked him by really tacking further right on the question of immigration in particular. So that surprised a lot of people last time around, and they're wondering whether he, will pursue such kind of agendas now. But basically, the big challenge for him, and going back to that survey published today, it shows that most people actually believe that he will be quickly overthrown by a motion of censure, no confidence motion, I should say. And that's the daunting task ahead of him. I mean, he's dealing with basically bitterly divided hung parliament that emerged after the parliamentary elections that Macron called in June. And already, the left-wing alliance, the New Popular Front, several elements of that, powerful elements of that, have been calling for protests. And we already saw protests, large protests in Paris yesterday, some protests, smaller protests in Marseille, but also in other parts of France, basically against Barnier's appointment, because their argument is he's from a party that actually won very few seats in the parliamentary elections. So how come he's appointed as prime minister when the left in particular feels it should have been theirs?
Indeed, because the Republicans polled in single figures when there was the snap parliamentary elections, whereas the New Popular Front, which is this sort of amalgam of absolute far left to centre left, which is sort of kicking itself in the shins every single day, but they, at the end of the day, won the most seats.
Indeed, but what's interesting is, and this left alliance, as you said, very diverse, but also very fractured, very divided. And there's nothing that the French left does better in fighting. But what we're seeing already is that not every faction within that alliance has come out calling for these protests. So it's clear that there are more pragmatic elements in that alliance who are willing to work with Barnier. And Barnier this morning, he gave interviews to the two major Sundays. He's basically saying, I want to work with everyone. I want a diverse government. I realize the challenges here. I realize the task ahead. And I want to work with everyone. So for now, Barnier is saying all the right things. I think something to watch here is how the more pragmatic elements on the left are willing to work with him. But also what's worth watching here is how the far right respond, because in many ways, the National Rally, the party of Marine Le Pen, was a kingmaker in terms of Barnier's appointment because of the clout it has within the parliament right now. But at the same time, the leader of the National Rally, Jordan Bardella, was yesterday basically publicly saying to Barnier, you're under surveillance. We have you under surveillance. To which Barnier retorted, I'm under the surveillance of the French people, not your party. So clearly, we're going to see, in the weeks ahead, and there are a lot of major tasks ahead in terms of most importantly, submitting the draft 2025 budget, which is supposed to be submitted by the 1st of October. But already we're seeing a lot of noise that would suggest both on the extreme right and the extreme left, there are many factions who are prepared to make life as difficult as possible for Barnier.
Tell us a little bit, Mary, if you would, about whether the joyful truce that was enjoyed during the Paris Olympics, which draw to a close today, has rubbed off and has any more long-term effect on the way that people are negotiating and approaching la rentrée, the political return to work as well. Because we mentioned at the top of the programme the fact that Paris has this glorious gift in its hands and it could use it for good. But one wonders whether the Parisians or whether France itself is too swift to knock it out of the way and just go back to bitter wrangling business as usual.
I'm afraid to say that there's very much a sense that the honeymoon, if you like, the Olympic honeymoon is over. Already there was a lot of resentment over the fact that it's 2 months basically waiting for a prime minister to be appointed. Macron did say that he was going to wait until after the Olympics had finished, but then it dragged on further. So that caused this kind of resentment, this anger to build even before Barnier's appointment. So there's really a sense right now with Barnier's appointment, which in some ways was unexpected, because, it's also a question of, there's been a lot of commentary in recent days, whether this shows whether what the French call Macronism is tacking further to the right by this alliance with the Republican Party. But there's a sense that basically we're back to business as usual, the infighting within the different political camps in France, but now this effort, as I said, to make life as difficult as possible for the new prime minister and, of course, the inevitable challenges. So that will raise in terms of important tasks ahead, like submitting the budget.
Finally, anyone who dipped their toes in the Med this summer had a lovely time because it was incredibly warm, which is good if you're trying to go for a nice swim, not so great in lots of other ways.
Indeed, and it's something that I noticed here in Marseille. Friends who live in other parts of the Mediterranean definitely noticed. So this year, the Mediterranean broke its record in terms of temperatures. Of course, this triggered a lot of concern in terms of how this is affecting the very diverse and delicate ecosystem of the Mediterranean. But I was struck by, there was a piece in Le Monde this week, a feature which is part of a series they're running called Repairing the Earth, looking at initiatives around the world that are mitigating or attempting to mitigate the impact of climate change. And it was a piece that the headline was referred to the good underwater fairies who are basically working to repair and regenerate coral off the coast of the south of France. And this is basically inspired by an organization that was founded in Malaysia in 2010 called Ocean Quest Global, founded by a Malaysian oceanographer, that's basically seeking to rehabilitate coral reefs across the world and ensure a more sustainable future for them. Lovely piece, and also that touched on this question of the Mediterranean. And the Mediterranean region is one of the world's fastest warming regions in general, in terms of air temperatures, but also water temperature. And it's something that really is becoming such a part of the conversation here, both officially, but also publicly, because people notice the difference every year. They see how temperatures are rising. They see how the water of the Mediterranean is also getting warmer, and it's causing a lot of concern.
Mary Fitzgerald in Marseille, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle on Sunday. It's Emma Nelson here, joined around the table by Latika Bourke and Simon Brooke. Simon, just briefly touching on the issue of Michel Barnier. The US presidential election became, like no other, a moment when people looked at age. And Michel Barnier, the elder statesman, he's in his 70s, an absolute bruiser of a politician. Yet one wonders why France needs to look backwards in order to go forwards.
I think it's all about stability, isn't it? It's about Emmanuel Macron trying to draw a contrast between the youth is a good thing, but the sort of immaturity and the rabble-rousing nature of the far left alliance on the one hand, and then experienced statesmanship on the other with Michel Barnier. One thing we do know from the British perspective, given that, of course, Barnier was on the opposite side of the negotiating table post-Brexit, is that he is a wily political operator, and I think that'll be important. He's got quite a bit on his agenda. I mean, a budget has to be ready by the middle of this month and then submitted to Parliament on the 1st of October. And that's going to be a difficult budget because the previous Prime Minister was committed to reducing France's ballooning budget deficit. So there could be cuts and things, questions about pensions. He's a wily political operator, but he's certainly going to be challenged over the next few months and years.
Thank you for that. Let's head now to the Venice Film Festival. Well, not necessarily to Venice itself, but the 81st edition of the festival ended this weekend with the awards ceremony, and paying close attention to it was our film critic and regular Monocle contributor Karen Krizanovich. A very good morning to you, Karen. Not in Venice, but somewhere very nice. Could you possibly tell us where you are, please, so we can make us all feel jealous?
At Ashling Park Estate, which is one of the finest vineyards in West Sussex. I guess it's Sussex, I suppose. It's absolutely beautiful. I'm looking out over wonderful vines, and a light rain is coming down. So it's if you get a chance, if you're near Chichester, pop in. It's really nice.
You poor thing. I know
I'm suffering.
I don't know how you're coping. We'll make sure you come into Midori House next time. We'll stop that. Let's have a look at what's been happening in Venice. Came to a close this week, and I think that the general narrative that people had been sort of saying about Venice was that, oh, look, it's like the Oscars light. It's gone super Hollywood. It's sort of really beefed up its presence in the last year, hasn't it?
It really has. And don't forget, I was there for most of the festival. I didn't stick around for the awards because I never do. But it was star-studded. I mean, packed to the rafters with stars, more so than any other year. And remember, it's been going for 81 years. This is the oldest film festival in the world, and this is without a doubt the first European ramp to the Oscars, because we had the strike last year where none of the stars could really show up, whether they were writers or directors. They really couldn't. This year they've just gone all out, and the films have been extraordinary.
So tell us which have been your highlights here, because you have to do all the watching for us when we don't have time to run around Venice.
To do a lot of watching, and because, we were talking about climate change earlier, but it was extremely hot, hotter than it's ever been at any of the festivals that I've attended, and it was just bliss to go into the cool air conditioning, so that was great. I have to say that Daniel Craig in Queer, the Luca Guadagnino film that's been finished, I think, for a while, is extraordinary. It's an extraordinary turn by him, and we all thought he was going to win the Volpe for Best Actor. He didn't, but by all accounts, this is a career best performance for him. So if you get a chance to see that, I should check when that's coming out, but I didn't. So there you go. But it's based on the 1985 novel by William S. Burroughs. Joker Folie à Deux, which is the sequel to Joker, didn't win any awards and was kind of getting mixed reviews. But one really fun thing that you can watch with your parents is George Clooney and Brad Pitt in Wolf. That's singular wolf with an S.
Is it any good?
It's fun.
Okay.
It's fun. There's maybe a little bit too much banter, but it's quite fun.
Excellent. We should look forward to that. Pedro Almodovar, though, doing brilliantly.
It's wonderful for him because this is his first English language feature, and it's also the first time he's won a major award at a festival, which is hard to believe. The performances are fantastic. Tilda Swinton and Julianne Moore as two friends helping each other through a tough time. Well, helping one of them through a tough time. And it's beautifully shot. The colors are eye-popping, as we always expect from Almodovar. And this one, I have to say, it may not be one of his absolute best, but it's a really beautiful piece of work.
Yeah, this film's called The Room Next Door, isn't it?
That's
and
right.
It's this amazing duet between Tilda Swinton and Julianne Moore. The trouble is that I think a lot of the commentary had been that Almodovar was always the bridesmaid in this one. So was his victory a surprise, given the fact that no one expects him to win anymore?
No, we don't expect him to win. And also his films are really watchable. And also it's, okay, I hate to say this, but there's a great selection of red lipstick on everybody, almost all the women. I'm just watching, whoa, what shade is that? Because he's so good with color. But it was just lovely because I think with the jury, I think, was going to go, headed by Isabelle Huppert. We just thought, which way is it going to go? Is it going to be Guadagnino because he's such he's a festival favorite? But it was just really lovely that Almodovar was embraced. And I think it gives him a boost and maybe in the later part of his career.
Karen Krizanovich, thank you so much. Back to your vines. Enjoy the rest of your day. Let's hear back from Latika Bourke and Simon Brooke. The idea that we're now going into the autumn. But there was something that you caught your eye, wasn't there, that's got totally unrelated to cinema, but to the way that our brains work. Latika, it was the idea about, we've been talking about the right wing and the left wing today, but actually this could be determined by the number of amygdala in your brain.
I was fascinated by this article. So it's in The Guardian. And they've basically looked at whether you can prove psychological conditions to demonstrate tendencies or ideations towards right-wing authoritarianism. So that's the example they use in this instance, but I would argue this would involve any sort of tendency towards extreme politics. And what they found was actually there's a part of the brain, it's about a tiny almond-shaped piece of brain. It mediates your fear. And what some researchers and psychologists argue is that if you had a very difficult childhood, your parenting was very strict, or worse, you had a very traumatic childhood, then this is the time that your brain is wired. And so on scans they did of people who express strong right-wing authoritarian tendencies, and we're talking here authoritarian tendencies, and things like support for death penalty and all sorts of harsher punishments than most of, I think, society would agree with, they found that this piece of the brain was actually larger. And they relate it to the experience of childhood that they had and directly link it to trauma and very, very strict or overbearing parenting. And we're not just talking about hover parenting here. We're talking about very traumatic childhoods. So I thought that was a very, very fascinating article to consider.
Because there are 2 points to this, that when a human being is born, they do not have any of this. And this is something that the Guardian points out. No one is born with hatred, rage, existential fear or cold contempt. But there is that thing that one wonders, is this too much of a cliche to say that a traumatic childhood will turn you into a monster? It seems like a very easy thing to say. Clearly, there's now scientific evidence to suggest it. But is there any room for people then to make an excuse or justify things, Simon?
It's interesting that the discussion analysis here of this piece, looking at Adolf Hitler's traumatic youth when he was attacked, and also something I think we all are aware of with Donald Trump, that his father was obviously very difficult, and it's interesting that his cousin, was it his niece? Sorry, Mary, who's a psychologist, who's described Donald Trump's father as a sociopath. Donald Trump is a poster boy for trauma, she's quoted as saying in this piece. And so, yeah, it's interesting to what extent are the sins of the parents visited on the children, and to what extent do we either try and understand with some compassion, some insight, people who do terrible things because of their parents, or do we just say, well, actually, they're still doing terrible things? You know, we all suffered in one way or another as we're growing up. It's part of life. We still think it's a terrible thing.
We're going to have a major handbrake turn at the end of this programme. We've talked about right wing, we've talked about weird, we've talked about, everything. The one thing that we do need to mention is an article in The Times from this weekend, Simon. Now, we must approach this subject with a caveat. Last week on Monocle on Sunday, the idea of a curried banana pizza was introduced. I'll look it up and I'll catch us up. So we're now actually it was in Sweden. I shall look that one up while you are now going to talk to us about the next iteration of the terrible pizza saga.
This is, I have to say, as somebody who does have a bit of a thing, I'm afraid, for a Hawaiian, the ham and pineapple. Sorry,
talk.
I know, it's shocking, isn't it? Absolutely. I've eaten it in Italy, whatever, but apparently one of Naples' most famous pizza makers, Gino Sorbio, has decided that the new thing that you should put on pizza is fruit, and in particular watermelon, which, I have to say, part of me is disgusted by, and part of me is quite intrigued about, really. I'm not sure whether it... But do we have to do these things to work out, Latika? You're looking incredibly sceptical.
Okay, I'm just thinking about... I'm not scientific in my brain at all, but doesn't there seem to be a basic issue with water?
Sogginess.
Sog.
Yes, thank you. I mean, you started the programme talking about damp.
This is real damp.
Let's not bring that onto the pizza, people.
Yeah. But does that show the skill of a pizza maker, that you could have the freshness and the juice of the watermelon, but still the crispiness of the bacon? The base.
There's bacon.
Bacon. Well, let's chub. If we're putting watermelon, let's put bacon in it. Yeah. And then you've got the creaminess of the mozzarella. So I don't know. Perhaps. Yeah. I mean, that was my thought. Unless you slow cook the watermelon for a long time, because apparently if you slow cook it, it can taste like tuna or look like tuna.
What?
Yeah, look like tuna or something.
But taste like a sponge.
No, this is Mariella, our producer here, who was just telling me earlier that there's a TikTok video showing somebody slow cooking watermelon.
There's a man on the internet who's actually come up with a million things to do with a watermelon. I've watched it. It goes on forever. It's quite boring.
Put it on pizza.
In certain areas. I'm not sure he actually puts it on pizza. I think I can help with the cooking and the sog bit. The picture of Gino Sorbio with a rather healthy looking companion tucking into the pizza. She looks as if she enjoys meals in such a healthy and wonderful Italian way. He's put the watermelon on the pizza after it has been cooked.
No, but I'm sorry. Watermelon erodes really fast, no matter what you do with it. And if you're putting it anywhere near somewhere hot,
you can have watermelon and feta cheese, and it works a treat.
Yeah, in a salad, but not on dough.
Well, perhaps you'd have to have it separate on a separate plate, and then it's kind of restaurant theatre, where you then put the chilled, sweet, juicy watermelon on the hot, melting, salty mozzarella.
Why do people complicate pizza?
Good question.
It's just so perfect the way it is.
Just put pineapple and ham on it like any normal person does,
Pineapple and ham. Actually, I mean, I grew up Australian, so we do those wild things to pizzas. I was in Positano and Amalfi a couple of weeks ago. Just perfect. 4 cheese, that's all you need.
Tomato for me.
Yeah, tomato, mozzarella.
Marinara.
You don't need a lot on a pizza to make it amazing.
No, you don't. But anyway, if you're Chef Gino Sorbio from the Via dei Tribunali in Naples, you've just had 5 minutes of totally free publicity on Monocle Radio.
Lucky man.
I'm not sure it was
good. But all publicity is good publicity.
Yeah, I'm not sure that was the publicity they were desiring. But anyway.
And that brings us to the end of the programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests, Latika Bourke, Simon Brooke, Mary Fitzgerald, Karen Krizanovich, and our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé. The programme was produced and engineered by Mariella Bevan. I'm Emma Nelson. Monocle on Sunday is back next week. But until then, enjoy the rest of your weekend, whatever you put on your pizza.